Um, who dares to mock Dark Brandon now? And Joe Biden keeps racking up the wins, and it's driving the sycophantic Republicans badly. And they underestimated Joe Biden. So in his first 2 years, of being in the White House, it's driving them fucking nuts. Um, when the 2020 presidential campaign was lurching into gear 3 years ago, the former Vice President Joe Biden had led in the polls for months, and still, everyone kind of assumed he was a placeholder, a former office holder with a high name recognition, and whose campaign would nevertheless go the way of his two previous presidential bids, meaning no fucking where, because that's what they thought. Now he was dull as a dishwasher compared to many of the other um as to many of the others vying for the nomination, and nobody had ever really considered him a presidential material. Um, as his campaign began to take off, other candidates were winning in the early states, even as Biden still led on national polls. Now, Bernie Sanders and Pete Buttigieg look like the major contenders after Iowa, New Hampshire, and Nevada states where Biden did poorly. Then somehow Biden managed to pull off a sweeping victory in South Carolina, and shortly thereafter, the race was effectively over. Now, Biden would go on to win the rest of the primaries handily. America was reeling during the traumatic first year of the pandemic, and there was a sense that Democrats were happy to have the race settled so that they could concentrate on taking down Trump, which was considered job one by every faction of the Democratic coalition. And even so, nobody expected much from Joe Biden. He had his charms, but he's a long time creature of Washington with an anachronistic fetish for bipartisanship. Now, all we could say realistically and expect, it seemed, was some relief from the chaos and a reliable, experienced staff to help right that ship. Now, when the Democrats barely held on to the House and squeaked out a 50-50 Senate majority, thanks to the runoff elections in Georgia and Trump's constant whining about how everything was rigged, everyone seemed that the Democratic agenda promised during the campaign was pretty much dead. And the best that we could hope for at that point was to stop the bleeding and live to fight another day. Um, Now, Biden has turned out to be full of surprises. Rather than just acting as a kindly old caretaker president until the new generation can take the wheel, his administration has been a flurry of activity, passing more Democratic domestic legislation than any president since Lyndon Johnson did it back in the '60s. And to name just a few, he signed into law the huge American Rescue Plan in the spring of 2021 with no Republican votes. He passed the $740 billion Inflation Reduction Act with massive investments in climate policy and healthcare, $280 billion in the Chips Act fund, funding a vital semiconductor industry in the U.S., the PACT Act to help veterans, and the first federal gun control legislation in almost 30 years. Now, in the big ominous spending bill that was just passed during the lame duck session, he got the Electoral Count Act included as a step toward avoiding another January 6th debacle. Finally, Biden pushed through and signed the Respect for Marriage Act, offering at least some protection to same-sex couples against the inevitable assault from the right-wing judges and legislators, and some of that legislation was even bipartisan, which seems like something out of an old black and white movie at this point. Now, to say it offhand, these achievements really are impressive, and even more so because of the need to accommodate the two Senate divas, the closet Republicans Joe Manchin and Kristen Sinema, who needed to be the center of attention at all times and who were unfortunately crucial to passing any legislation. It was often torturous watching the Senate sausage making, with Biden himself often appearing unable to manage the negotiations, despite his alleged mastery of the process. But somehow he pulled it off and it worked. Now, a lot of important items were left on the cutting room floor, of course, and it's largely due to the aforementioned diva twins: no voting rights reform, no new child tax credit, and no subsidies for the elderly. There are a dozen other worthy programs I can name. Important tax legislation was nixed by Sinema for inexplicable reasons, and nonetheless, what remains is substantial and meaningful, and frankly, kind of miraculous, considering the narrow Democratic majority and the toxic political climate. Now, Now, Biden quietly led the party to those major wins, but a lot of the credit must go to the Democrats in both houses, who clearly appreciated that they had a unique opportunity to get things done before the batshit GOP regained some power. I wouldn't have bet on that happening either. Now, Biden has also been getting federal judges confirmed as quickly as possible, and he's doing it at an outpacing speed over as did with Obama and Trump. Now, just as important, these judges are all highly qualified, unlike the crew of misfits that the Trump administration put forth, and they are the most divisive group in history. And 3/4 of them are women, 2/3 of people of color, and 11 are former public defenders, which is more than the number appointed by all previous presidents combined. Now, as he promised, he nominated the first black woman to the Supreme Court, the impressive Ketanji Brown Jackson, to the Supreme Court. Now, as for foreign policy, Biden inherited a global mess after Trump stomped all over the world like an orange colossus, befriending every tyrant on the planet and treating allies like shit. Biden has reset many of those relationships, and as a result, he has been able to deftly manage U.S. involvement in Ukraine, unquestionably a delicate and dangerous crisis. Now, the withdrawal from Afghanistan, which was proposed by both Obama and Trump, but never actually carried out, was messy, but everyone knew it would be. And Biden showed admirable resolve in going through with it anyway, even though he was hamstrung by Trump's blunderless negotiations, and deserves credit rather than the outrageous moral preening by the press, which suddenly decided it cared about the Afghan people after ignoring them for years. Now that was a sickening bookend to the raw cheerleading that the media delivered when George W. Bush ordered the invasion of Afghanistan 20 years earlier. Biden also decided against the advice of the Beltway the punditocracy and the most democratic strategists, and to use the bully pulpit to fight the Republicans on their extremism views and the obvious threat that they pose to democracy. Now, Biden's critics claim that people don't care about that stuff and that the presidential bully pulpit is a waste of breath anyway. The results of the 2022 midterms suggest that they were full of it, and Biden's instincts were obviously correct. Now, I think that some of the success, paradoxically, is because Joe Biden is our oldest president, and not in spite of that fact. There's a certain YOLO quality to many people his age, which he seems to have channeled into a willingness to take calculated risks that have largely paid off. And Doug Brandon has seen it all. He doesn't scare easily. Now, none other than former Speaker Newt Gingrich issued a warning to his fellow Republicans not long ago that they were making a big mistake if they underestimate Joe Biden and his team. He said that they were being foolish to obsess over Biden's age, and they need to recognize that they are what they are up against, a very methodical machine which has done a remarkable job. But when you look at results, you may dislike them philosophically, but you have to be realistic that these people have been effective, and you have to assume that they're going to go into 2024 with a pretty powerful machine running a juggernaut. Whether that football coach analysis is accurate remains up for grabs, but there's no doubt that the Biden administration has gotten a whole lot accomplished in 2 years under exceptionally difficult circumstances. Now, underestimating this president has been a mistake ever since he entered the race back in 2019. So if you like the video, you can give the video a like and subscribe to my channel, RBW King. You can also hit the notification bell so that you'll be notified when a new video comes out. And if you want to support my work even further, you can donate to my Patreon link, which you can find in the about section of YouTube. And for just as little as a few bucks a month, your donation can help go a long way, and thanks for listening.